Okay, I should say tervetuloa.
I know like three Finnish words. My grandparents were or my grandfather was of the ilk that we're American now, you're going to be American. So they spoke it and I heard it growing up, but they never taught us. My mom begged, and he wouldn't teach us.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
such a shame. I
I
mean,
mean,
I used to speak it fluently till I was about 5. And then my mum said to me, I actually grew up in Italy. So we spoke English in the household. And then obviously I spoke Italian outside. And I think when you're young, you just want to fit in. And so my
yeah,
mum said to me at some point, I refused to speak Finnish to her. So she stopped speaking it to me. And I was like, well, you should have carried on speaking it to me, even if I didn't answer you in Finnish. But yeah,
yeah.
bit of a shame. I did actually download it on Duolingo, so my Finnish is actually better than I thought. I was doing quite well on Duolingo, actually. I mean, I can't converse very well. Like my
Yeah.
vocabulary is like a 5-year-old. Um, but I was like, I want to brush up on it again, which is totally useless because there's only like 5 million Finns in the whole world.
I know, but it's very cool. I mean, it's part of, who you are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 70s and it was just, the whole assimilation thing. And he was born in the States. He had older siblings. Like he was one of, I think there were 11 siblings, and he was the youngest. So he was born in the States, but his older siblings, they all spoke Finnish. So in his house, they spoke Finnish. So he grew up and he was fluent his whole life. But yeah. I feel
Wow.
like I missed out. I wish they would have taught because languages aren't my strong suit, and I'm trying to learn Spanish living in El Salvador, and it's just hard.
Yeah, it's definitely easier if you can speak languages. I think there's something that happens with your brain, and it's also just the muscles. Like you're
It
trained
is.
to speak. Like I find if I don't speak Italian for a long time and then I go to Italy and I speak Italian all the time, my mouth actually gets tired because I'm using different muscles to speak. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I think Spanish is probably reasonably easy for me. I mean, I did a little bit of Spanish lessons a few years back. The only thing was my Spanish teacher would say to me, you think you're speaking Spanish, but what you're doing is you're speaking Italian. Like I'd
That's
say an
funny.
Italian word and like Spanishize
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, I had 6 years of French between high school and college, and I got to be where I'm pretty good. But now when I'm out speaking, I say things in French. I mean, it's just that's where my language is, and I'm like, yeah, I just said bonjour in the middle of the grocery store, or excuse me, I'd like to get by in French, and I'm like, this is not helpful. So it's fun where we store our language.
Yeah, that is funny. So I guess you should really introduce yourself and say who you are. Actually, we're
Okay,
just
yeah,
diving straight in.
I know. So my name's Deanna Heikkinen, and I'm a longtime educator and Bitcoiner. And I've kind of put those two passions together. My husband and I, we moved to El Salvador last year to get out of America, and no regrets, no looking back. We do have to go back. We have a storage unit in Houston that has my library in it. So my most prized possessions, all my books are still in the States, but we love living down here. So
Oh, that's
um,
amazing. Wow.
yeah,
It's funny, sorry, can I just say as well that you look so Finnish?
I know. I know there was never any doubt. Like it's my dad's side, and I look so much like the Finns. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've got the same like the cheeks.
Yeah, I know. When I was little, they're like, we could drop you in Finland, and no one would know that you
Oh,
weren't 100%.
can you imagine what a nightmare actually everybody be talking to you in Finnish? The thing, this is part of the problem as well with Finnish, though, is you go to Finland and everybody speaks perfect English. So the minute you open your mouth and they see that you're struggling, they immediately switch to English, and it's like,
Yeah. I'm having that too here because everybody wants to learn English down here. And so
oh,
if they know any English, I'm like, can we practice Spanish? They're like, no, I want to practice my English. So yeah,
wow. Yeah, I mean, Spanish is a bit tricky if you haven't grown up speaking a Romance language, but your French should help. At least it will help
it
with
is.
the grammatical
Yeah.
structure.
It is helping. It's definitely helping with the grammatical structure. And I was taking lessons, but I'm writing a book right now. And so I kind of put everything on pause to get that done.
Yeah,
So
that's
as soon
fair.
as that's released, I'll go back to taking my lessons.
And so, are you from Texas originally then?
I'm actually a native Californian. I'm kind of
Huh.
sad to say at this point of the world, but yeah, so I grew up in Northern California, outside of the palm trees and the beaches that everybody associates with California. Small little rural community where we pretty much all farmland.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in town, but I had a lot of friends that grew up on farms. So I grew up in a small town that was just very traditional. It was, I'm older, so it was the 70s when I was growing up, and my mom stayed at home. My dad wouldn't let her work. And so she did little things like baking cakes and sewing for people to get some money. But it was just, I grew up with a good childhood, and just very sweet. And then um, in fourth grade, my parents split up and we moved to cities, and I lived in cities all the way through probably my 20s
Oh,
for the
wow.
most
What a
part. So I
change.
had kind of both of, you know, city life young and then through my 20s. And then I actually I lived mostly in cities in probably my life, but I now love living in small places, like small rural places. I long for quiet. I don't
Yeah.
want to live in the city again.
I
I
think
think it's
that's
just being
I think that's
older.
an age thing. I'm the same.
Yeah,
I lived in like London and New York and stuff like that for decades.
right,
And then it's like, and I mean, I don't live like in the middle of nowhere now, but you can hear a pin drop.
right. It's
And I
yeah,
just
it's
couldn't go back to
nice.
that. I was planning a
Yeah.
road trip actually last week, and I was looking at all these different places where you can stay, and they're like all these farms and stuff. And I did have a moment where I was like, should I go live on a ranch?
And that's our dream down here is to just buy a little plot of land. And the older I get, the plot of land I want, it gets smaller and smaller because I'm like, I don't want to manage that much land anymore. I don't want to work that hard. So I'm like, well, maybe we'll hire a young couple and, help them homeschool their kids and then they can take care of the land.
Oh, that's a
So
good idea. Yeah, and you
yeah.
could have a few chickens and just like a vegetable
I know.
patch.
We
Oh,
had, yeah. So I've lived a lot of places in the States. This is my first international move. But mostly city. I mean, I taught at LA, in an LA college. And so I've lived in big cities, lived in San Francisco, lived in Seattle, and Phoenix. But I've also lived in Wyoming and Northwest Florida. So I've had kind of both of that as well.
wow. So I
Yeah.
guess we should probably, sorry, that shadow in the
Right.
background there is my dog. He's just stood up on the bed in case you're wondering why there's a brown shape moving around.
Yeah. Someone's lurking.
Oh, yeah, he's busy licking his foot. Um, I guess we should start with your orange pill journey first, really, because that'll probably take us to your journey to El Salvador in a more coherent way.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
you were working as an educator, so you've done that for like most of your life. How did you discover Bitcoin?
So I was teaching college and I got a full-time tenured position in 2010. Yeah, 2011, I guess. But I had been adjuncting and I went back to school actually and became a teacher later on. And so I didn't teach like my whole life. That wasn't my whole career, but I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I went back to school and I did archaeology. I dug in Egypt for a while and then I became a professor. I knew I wanted to teach. That was my calling. And so I was adjuncting and freeway flying all around Southern California. And then I got a full-time position. And then right after that, I met my husband, or not obviously then my husband, but and early on in our relationship, he's just a very curious guy and he discovered Bitcoin. And I remember we were sitting at the Huntington Gardens near Pasadena where we lived, and he was telling me about this money and my head exploded. It was, yeah, I couldn't grasp it. So I've known about it for a very long time.
Do you remember what year
And
that was? Like how
it was,
early?
it was 2011.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so I've been around Bitcoin and have known about it for a very long time.
Hmm.
I haven't, and through most Bitcoin journeys, like we couldn't figure out, he couldn't figure out how to get it and all this kind of stuff. And everybody's like, oh, you've been around for how much are you stacking? I'm like, yeah, we all go through our journeys, right? So it's not like I have a million Bitcoin sitting around or anything, um, but I knew about it. And what kind of brought me to where I am, what I'm doing today is that, like I said, I grew up in rural California. I'm first generation college student. I'm the first person in my family on either side, as far as we can go back, with a graduate degree. Definitely the first with a doctorate. And so, we just didn't come from like a heavy education family. Now, my mom advocated education. She was an avid reader. We always had books in the house. I mean,
Mm.
armloads from the public library, always had books. We were always reading. And so I grew up with that. And I love the classics. They've always been my best friends, all the classic literature. My mom and my sister read cheesy romances, like the Harlequin stuff, which I'm like, I look down my nose at, but it is, I mean, I read cheesy romance novels too to decompress, but not the ones that they would read. So, and so, but we didn't really have a sophisticated outlook on money, and I didn't understand it. I had a really bad relationship with money, particularly after my parents divorced, because my mom was a single mom with two daughters, and my dad helped, but he married pretty quickly, and it was seriously the Cinderella story with the evil stepmother and step siblings.
Oh,
So
really? Wow.
she kept my dad and the money away from us as much as possible. So we struggled a lot. And then in my late 20s, I didn't go to college right away because my dad wouldn't pay for it and we couldn't afford it. So I went back in my late 20s and put myself through school.
Wow.
And in my 30s, I got um, two bachelor's degrees and two master's degrees. And I just head down
I love it.
and
You're late off
I
the
went to
mark and then you
school.
just massively overdo it.
Yeah. Well, I'm type A. What do you want? If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And so I got a degree in history and I got a degree in anthropology, focusing on archaeology, particularly Egyptology, and my classical historian, particularly late antique Rome. And so I had all of these interests, have a degree in art history, and I decided I wanted to teach. I want to share all these beautiful things from Western civilization for the rest of my life. So I got the job, got my dream job at a college, and that um, met my husband kind of at the, few months after that. And then he discovered Bitcoin. And so I have this really kind of toxic relationship with money, as a lot of Americans do, particularly those that grew up without money. My family didn't tell me, like, okay, you're going to get a good job and you're going to be offered a 401k. I didn't really understand what that meant. I had this retirement. I was in the CalSTRS program and I had this really high paying job and I wasn't responsible. And because of my upbringing and in schools, they don't teach you anything.
Yeah.
A few word problems with some coins. Like if you have 20 nickels and you give Johnny 3 dimes, I mean, it's irresponsible.
Mm.
And
Yeah, you
so,
don't get taught how to do your taxes. You don't get taught how
no,
credit card works, how credit cards work, anything like that. It's crazy. I
or
think in the
even,
UK they've started doing it now. There's some kind of financial
yeah,
literacy stuff that they do, but it's quite new.
it is. And what they teach you is based on a broken system. And so once we decided, I had to leave America. I mean, my family goes back to the Mayflower on one side, obviously not the Finnish side, but the other side. And so I have a deep love of the Constitution and the founding documents and the Federalist Papers, and Madison is my hero, one of them, and George Washington, based on, kind of doing the same thing that Cincinnati did. And the more I studied history and going back to school, the more I realized that these founding fathers of America, they did something remarkable. And they were the first men on the planet to create a nation from ideas as opposed from, just nepotism of, I inherited this land and I'm going to create a country. Like in the Middle Ages, they would have these fiefdoms, or through war or some other means. This was actually created out of ideas. And I had the utmost respect for that my whole life. So I didn't learn about money, but my dad definitely instilled that love of the founding of America and what it means. And my mom instilled a love of museums and art and culture and curiosity. So I had this wonderful upbringing from these parents who weren't educated. And the more I got educated, the more I realized what I didn't know and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to know. And so learning a little bit about Bitcoin, being with a guy who was, he was trained in trading and day trading and stuff like that. He was a lot more schooled on money, but he kind of did that. And I wasn't that interested in it for a long time. So what's happened in America, I couldn't live there anymore because I mean, I'm a Roman historian. I study the fall of Rome. That's what I did, right?
When
And
you
I'm
said
like,
that, I was so desperate to ask you, that meme? I was like, how many times a day do you think about the fall of Rome?
no, I fought every single, like many times a day. I'm like a man, right? According to that little poll on social media. So I do. I honestly think about it every day, and it just makes me laugh. And I'll go and I'm telling my husband, like, thinking about Rome. So,
So that's an
uh,
interesting point though. Can you
yeah,
expand on that then? Because you obviously see parallels. So like what
I
parallels do you see? And can you sort of explain the
def
history to people?
I definitely do. And so my research is in early Christianity, and particularly in Egypt, the transition from traditional Pharaonic beliefs, even though they were impacted by Greco-Roman beliefs, they were still polytheistic, and they still involved a lot of ritual around burials and things like that. And so when the Christians came in, you butt heads. I mean, that's why traditionally there's been a lot of issues between Jewish faith, people who follow the Jewish religion, the Babylonian captivity. I mean, you can keep going back in history, and it's because monotheism and polytheism don't really go together. Because if you're polytheistic and you meet other polytheistic religions, you can just kind of assimilate those gods in with yours, but no one's telling you there's only one and you're wrong, except for that blip in Egyptian history with Akhenaten, but that's another whole podcast if anybody's curious about that history. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But in general, and so this idea of like Christianity coming in and impacting. So the fall of Rome is complex. Anybody who's read Gibbon or has studied it or even curious and read a little bit about it, you know that it's not one thing. It's not just monetary decline. It's not just these horrible emperors. It's not the militaristic of the empire. It's not Christianity, but it's all of those things happening in tandem, in like all at the same time to mess up this great civilization. So what I see happening in America is the left and wokeism is part of what's happening on top of you had the Fed come in, you have central banking, you have New Deal policies in the 1930s following the Great Depression that then get people more reliant upon things like Social Security and these different programs. You get Johnson in in the mid-century, and he comes out with policies that are actually very racist. He was an avowed racist. It's documented he's a racist. And he came out with these sort of welfare policies that intrinsically are designed to keep people down.
Mm.
And so all of this stuff happened. So it's not like it's one thing that's happened. So that's just on the economic side. Then you get an education, and I'm an educator, I have a doctorate in education, and I studied this a great deal about what happened because I'm curious. Thank goodness my mom instilled that into me. So I want to know the why. I'm always curious about the why. Why did this happen? So I kept going back in time. Okay, so maybe it's the 1960s with Johnson and he has the ESEA. So it's this policy where we're now starting to pull education from the states by throwing money at them for these little programs, particularly like some programs for people with disabilities and things like that. And then like, well, it has to be before that. So then you go back to John Dewey, and then you go back to Horace Mann, and you keep going back and you figure it out. And so you have this decline in education and a decline of teaching a classical liberal education where the founding fathers who built this great nation were schooled in all of these great ideas across time, even some that were contemporary with them. And then you have a decline where you're no longer teaching those. And then you're just going to say, well, we're going to focus on getting people employed in jobs. And that's the 20th century. So all of these things are happening. And I'm looking and I'm seeing parallels between all of that. You have the religion of the woke left, right? That's basically nihilism and destroying. And I say it's like Christianity, but you have a new a very prominent, very loud, very dominant forward people, saying you're either with us or against us. And it's very violent. And it mirrors what happened in the late 4th century in Rome and even into the early 5th century. Because when you have two clashing ideologies, it gets violent. I mean, it's still
Sorry,
happening.
do you mean that the parallel with Rome is that Christianity came in and caused a violent clash?
Yeah, because it was very
Oh,
violent. Now, originally, under like
really?
Under Diocletian, Earlier, the Christians were killed, right? We have documentation. Whether or not they were actually used in the gladiatorial games as, sort of fodder for the lions, it's kind of debated amongst the scholarship. But early on, if you claim to be Christian, then you would be killed. And so we have this era of martyrs. Within 100 years, under Theodosius and the new code, it changes. If you are not Christian, you are killed. And it is rather violent. In Alexandria, you had the sort of attack of the Serapeum, which is this great place of classical thought where all these scrolls were. And so it's violent. I mean,
So
you
why
can
do
look
you
at,
think it flipped? That's interesting though. So like in the beginning, Christians were persecuted, but then they became the persecutors.
yeah. Well, so it's so complex. It's so basically what happens is that you have Constantine the Great, and whether he's great or not can still be debated. But you know, like all politicians, there may be some good things, but there may be some bad things. And so you have Constantine, and he said, now you can practice any religion. And so there was religious tolerance, which was great. His mother was Christian. His dad was of the militaristic cult that was very popular. And so he had these things, and he's out on the battle, and he thinks he sees the sign from God where there's a cross on a shield. They win the battle they should have lost. And so now he becomes more tolerant and maybe even a believer, although he didn't convert until his deathbed. So he comes out with the Edict of Milan. Hey, you can be any religion that you want. Great. And then after him, we only have one emperor that isn't Christian. And then Theodosius, who comes after, says, okay, we are now a Christian empire. If you are not Christian, you will be killed. And there's an edict. And so, whereas 100 or so years earlier, there were witch hunts against the Christians, you now have Christians that are empowered to hunt down anybody who's not. I mean, one of my really inspiring stories from history for me is a woman named Hypatia from Alexandria. And she was this incredible teacher of the ancient philosophy, which is really science in our modern world. She was an astronomer, and she was persecuted. And there are three or four firsthand accounts that talk about what happened. And it's insanely violent, where they kind of draw her out, they take her, they drag her behind a chariot, they stone her. Well, first they stone her to death, they dismember her body, and it's very violent, and there are stories of this. So that's something. It's whenever you have ideologies clashing, it does become violent. And this last spring, with what was going on in American politics, I'm like, I'm out. I'm Pollyanna. Like, I can study this stuff. It's fascinating, but I don't want to live it. So we moved here to El Salvador, and I said, you know what? I started doing, I mean, obviously when you move to a new country, we shut our business down. We're like, what are we going to do now? So we're trying to figure this stuff out. I still teach online for a writing center from the States, but it's very minimal. It's not that many hours. So we're just trying to figure out what we want to do. And so I was working with a nonprofit and kind of came up with this curriculum. It wasn't necessarily a good fit, which is fine. So I took that, and I'm writing a book, and it should be published in May. And from that book, I'm going to be writing curriculum for kids, because this is a long-winded story. I'm still angry at that little girl who never learned about money. And I want to help as many kids, help as many parents. I'm a homeschool advocate, even though I was public schooled up until my doctorate, because I know the system. I've seen what comes out of it. I've been tutoring kids for 7 years in the system, both public and private. I have my pulse, at least on the American system, and it's trickling out. And the European system is not that great either, with the ideologies that are coming in a lot of the particularly more Western countries in Western Europe. And then, you start looking at UN policies, and you see DEI coming in all over the place, and countries are signing off on it. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of on this crusade to say, okay, homeschool your kids. If you're a Bitcoiner and you believe in freedom and living a sovereign life, and you want to control your money, if you're not controlling the minds of your children, not controlling, but having a say, and you're just offhanding that to some
I
centralized
think
system.
I would almost phrase it differently. I would say allowing your kids actually to think freely. So it's not even about controlling
Yeah,
them, it's about giving them the
right,
freedom to question things and actually think for themselves, which I think the
right.
education system is failing quite badly at right now.
It is. And when I say control, I mean take that away from this model of for 30, 35 hours a week, you don't have to deal with your kids. I mean, throughout America, kids are now fed 3 meals a day. In LA, they're given free breakfast and free lunch in a lot of cases. And then if they stay after school programs, they can get another snack or a dinner. And so parents don't even have to think about food anymore. And I'm like, why are you parenting? I mean, this is a responsible thing. I don't have children. I met my husband too late. And so it's irresponsible to just have kids and not think that you should be responsible for them, right? And so,
I
and it
think
is
though,
right.
I mean, as a Bitcoiner, you'd probably agree though that comes back to the problem with the money, because it used to be that a single salary would keep a family, in quite a good, standard of
Abs
living. And now it
Absolutely.
doesn't.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
both
why,
kids, both
yeah,
parents go to work, and then it's like, oh, what do you do with the children? The thing I find really strange actually in modern society is that grandparents don't live with kids more actually, and take on some of the parenting, because it seems strange to me that grandparents get outsourced to old people's homes, like to retirement homes,
yeah.
and then the kids get outsourced to schools, and then the parents go out to work. And I just think, well, if you guys all live together in one house, how it used to be, it would kind of solve a lot of these problems. I don't understand why that hasn't actually become the default structure in society. It's strange to me.
It is very strange. And an interesting thing doing archaeology in Egypt, which I thought this was a brilliant system. They have houses and they're multi-story, and on the first story live like mom and dad, and then the next story they build a house for the son, and then maybe the next one is for the next son, right? And as they age, then the grandparents, and then so they have these multi-generational multi-story houses, so there is some independence, but they're there like it's your family, and they're all taking the responsibility of raising children and being there for each other. It's just amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
It's
It's,
a
it's a
great
much better
model.
system. Yeah, I totally
Absolutely.
agree. I mean, I think farming people out to like various different places is just, it's not optimal. I mean, it's funny actually, because like when we got our first dog, he used to go to daycare because we were living in New York. And it's just funny, like it was like an actual doggy daycare.
Oh, I
Um,
love it.
I know everyone in the UK thought it was so funny because they're not really a thing in the UK so much. I don't know why. I guess people maybe who work don't tend to have dogs as much, or something like that. I
Yeah.
don't know. But yeah. And so it's just funny because he went to daycare. But then obviously when COVID hit, suddenly everybody's home, and you suddenly notice how happy the animals are because they're pack animals, and you're
Yeah.
around, and he loved his dog walker, and he used to enjoy going to some of the daycares. But it was just like a whole different thing, and it really gave me pause for thought. I thought, oh my god, like they just want to be with us like all the time. They don't want to be
Right.
going out and adventuring with their friends if we're not going to be there. Um so I think it's the same with kids, right? With human children, it's the same.
It
They just want to be with
absolutely
family.
is. And the
Mm.
thing is that when I use the word control, meaning that you should choose how your children are educated. So maybe you get together with a few other families and you hire a tutor. Great. But you shouldn't just trust a system, particularly if you know how bad and corrupt the system is. And when I say corrupt, I mean it's admin heavy, and the curriculum that they're using is really awful. It's
It
not teaching the basic skills. It's not teaching phonics, which is the best way to teach reading. They're no longer teaching cursive, which there's
really
studies out. Yeah, they don't teach cursive in the States. I have kids, I would write cursive giving back feedback on essays, and my students are like, "Can you print? I can't read that."
no.
Yeah, and so if you teach cursive before you teach printing to young children, there's less um prevalence of dysgraphia, of dyslexia because of the natural movement. And so I advocate teach your kids cursive before they print. It's easier on their motor skills. They don't have to lift their hand off the paper. They don't try to make straight lines.
That's crazy as well, because I remember learning cursive writing when I was 6.
Yeah, we learned cursive very early, but they
Wow.
don't do that anymore. And So there's just all of these things. They don't teach phonics, tried and true methods. So it's almost like they're trying to dumb down America. I wonder why they would do that. Easier to control dumb people. And see, this is where I'm like, I'm starting to sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist, but I'm not being proven wrong anymore. And
Yeah.
the more that I look into things, I'm always doing research. I still have access to all of these research databases. So every once in a while, I'll just kind of go down a rabbit hole and reach. I'm like, I want to see what the latest scholarship is on this. And
Isn't there a movie like that? I can't remember what it was called, but you know, that guy comes from somewhere and he's like normal, what we would consider normal, but the whole world is really backwards and they all think he's a genius. What's it called again?
oh,
Do you know
I
the one
don't,
I mean? Where he'll like
I
say
don't,
just the most obvious stuff and people go, wow,
I
you're
don't, but it doesn't
amazing.
surprise me it
I
would
can't
be
remember what it's
made.
called. It will come to me. But anyway, it's like it's a
Yeah.
US movie, but a lot of people are saying, oh my gosh, that's actually kind of like real life.
It
Yeah.
feels like that. And you know what, if you look at, so I'm a book collector. And although I downsized my library twice in the last 5 years, I still have a lot. We moved from Seattle to Florida and then Florida to here, so I keep downsizing, but I still have a lot. I have over 100 books in storage, boxes of books in storage right now. But I
Wow.
love old textbooks. And so I had old textbooks from the mid 19th century. And you look at what they're learning for fourth grade, and this is college level today. And I'm not kidding. I taught history and humanities. I teach writing, and I'm seeing what they were reading. And most kids, unless they have a curiosity and a wherewithal to want to learn things, they can't read stuff. Like I tutored a fifth grader who was reading translations of Copernicus, and we had great discussions. So it's not that they can't do it in the modern world. It's that they're one, not expected to, and the
Mm.
teachers aren't challenging them. And having gone through a teacher's college, I know exactly what the focus is in teachers' colleges. My dissertation was on intellectual diversity in higher education, and I couldn't find a chair until they hired somebody who was religious. My dissertation is not on religion. I used Ayn Rand as my measure. So professors who taught Ayn Rand, their experience and the perception of what the student experience was, whether it was negative or positive from their colleagues, if they ever got in trouble from the admin, things like that. So teaching Ayn Rand was my measure. They made me use a critical theory. So I took critical race theory, flipped it on its head, used it to measure diversity of ideas. Because for me, that's the only diversity that matters in a college.
Oh,
What do you
100%.
think?
Yeah.
And the other stuff, I'm sorry, we're born. We can't change any of that, but you can change how you think. So that should be the only thing that matters in terms of diversity.
I mean, I totally agree. I mean, the corporate world, it's hilarious because they hire people that look different. So they'll be like, oh, we'll get somebody who's brown or somebody who's like slightly darker brown or whatever. You know, we want
Yeah.
everybody to look different races. And then you look at all these people, and of course, they all come from the same social class, the same economic class. They've gone to the same schools. And I'm like, the
Yep.
only thing that's diverse about them is the way that they look. If you remove all physical appearance, they're basically cut from the same cookie cutter. And I just think that's not diversity. And it like it's all done in sort of service of, well, actually, to be fair, the UN has a lot to answer for here because it's a lot of their sustainable goals and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff that they
Absolutely.
yeah. And so what you end up with is
Absolutely.
this anyway homogenous, like kind of workforce, but they just look different. And you tick your little box and you go, oh, look, I've got
Mhm.
my thing now. And now I can get indexed as a diverse company that supports diversity and this and that. It's like, no, you're not.
It's so true. And they do that in school. So I was in classes and they cared more about, skin color, gender. And, I had two classes about diversity and a doctoral program in education. And I kept raising my hand saying, okay, yeah, yeah. What about diversity of ideas? And I would get the sneer the first time in my life, like I'm Hermione Granger, front row, raising my hand. I'm that student my whole life. First time in my life, I'm getting like the irritated glances. I'm the rebel rouser. And I've never been that in that role before. But because I was questioning this premise that something related to our biology, our DNA code, matters more than what we think in an educational institution, and I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the irony is it's just inherently racist. I mean, this is the thing. I think when you read about sort of
Absolutely.
DEI in principle, it sounds nice. And then when you see it in practice, it's basically racist. Well, it's not basically, it's racism. Um, like it's just crazy how we've got here. So I just find it nuts really that it's kind of become socially acceptable to be racist again. I mean, I'm just like sorry, but I'm not regressing down that path. Like that
No,
was
I don't.
ugly and very bad, and we're not doing it again. And I don't care who the target of the racism is. Like sorry, but no, like I'm not going to subscribe to an ideology that supports that. That's horrible.
It's it's true, and it's really it's vile. It's disgusting behavior. And
Yeah.
I was on the academic senate. I was on a statewide curriculum committee. I was curriculum chair, distance education chair on my campus. Like I was really involved in the college, and I was ostracized from the state level, from district level, from college, on the academic senate. There was like this program. At the time it was during, money was a little tight for certain things on the college, and so they had a grant, and it had to go through for a diverse population. They wanted to use it on 8% of our students, African American males. And I said, well, why don't we put the money into a program that serves a lot more of our students? We can include the Latina community, we can include, we had a huge Armenian community. So I'm like, why don't we just give it to EVOPS, which is this established program? And there's also first generation college students in that community. So these are people that are typically underserved because they don't have home support at home, which is inherently racist in of itself to put people of particular races in there. But the first generation college student, I went through that experience. I was fine because my mom always instilled the value of education, but I knew that's not always normal. I'm like, let's put the money in there. And I was called a racist in that meeting because I didn't want to put it just for African American males. But I'm like, look, this is
Oh my
like
God.
58% of our population are in this program or eligible for this program,
They actually
even if they
called you a
don't take advantage of it.
racist.
Pretty much. Yeah. So
That's
they said
shocking.
what did they say? One of my colleagues kind of sneered at me and just said something about me being white and not understanding.
Oh my God.
So
Wow.
I mean, not in, they weren't saying you're a racist and like tarring and feathering me, but I was told because I'm white, I don't understand. And basically just shut up.
Wow.
So it wasn't hard in 2017 to walk away from a college. I was making over six figures. I had a cushy retirement. I could have done what some of my colleagues did, where I just created a Scantron exam, taught the same boring lecture, did the same stupid Scantron exams, not try to get my students to write or think or challenge them or change my classes every semester because I don't want to get bored. And so I gave my all and I did all this stuff and I didn't have to. I could have been complacent, but I don't know how to be complacent. And I walked away. And then I started a homeschool company with my husband and my sister, and we built classical curriculum. Our problem is that I think any sort of moral or religious or however you want to have that teaching, I think that should come from the home and the family, not from curriculum. And so we build ourselves as secular, not knowing in the homeschool world that that is basically you cut off your foot because if you're secular, you're woke
Oh,
or you're religious, and we were neither. So we struggled trying to find our audience
oh
because we
my
built this
goodness.
beautiful integrated curriculum for middle and high school that was history and literature. And in high school, we added philosophy, where we had these units like on heroes, and we would teach the Red Badge of Courage, and I would teach Frederick. We had, and it was curriculum for the parents to use. So it was Red Badge of Courage, which is a novel about the Civil War, reading Frederick Douglass, reading some primary source documents and putting it all together
Oh
into a nice
wow.
little package so everything was integrated. So there's not teaching in these silos, which is very common in education. And I still use that curriculum all the time for my private teaching.
Hmm.
I'm a private tutor now. And it was amazing. We have this incredible unit on frontier, the American frontier. So we teach this novel called Shane that's based on loosely based on something that happened in Wyoming about when basically Manifest Destiny, or when the settlers came in and there were the cattle ranchers, and that battle between the cattle ranchers who wanted open land and the settlers wanted to sort of civilize the area and have fences. And there was a thing about ownership of land, who actually owned them. So it's really interesting. And then we talk about some American heroes like Davy Crockett. And then they're reading the journals of Lewis and Clark, going across America for the first time.
Can I take your curriculum?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I have stuff that I'm working on kind of in the background, and one of them is to offer this kind of stuff for adults
I was going to say, like, why do the
through,
kids get to do this?
I know, through reading, because it's really amazing, and to lump all this stuff together. So you read a novel, you read these primary sources, and you see this connection.
Have you thought about doing a book club around this? Because that would be really fun.
That's what I'm working on right now. So I'm
Are
going to
you?
have fiction. Yeah. So the first one is actually
Can I join?
absolutely anybody can join. It'll be on Twitter. And I'm going to do Twitter. I'm going to do it with Twitter Spaces. I'm not really on Instagram and Facebook like I used to be, and I'm really happy about that. So I'm pretty much only on Twitter now. And it'll be through Spaces. The first thing I'm going to do, because there's such this reverence right now for Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, and it irritates me because I think Aristotle has better ideas.
Really? Huh.
Absolutely. So I'm going to my first one, and it'll probably be next month in April once I get the edits done on the book. We'll be reading Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, and then reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations all the way through, cover to cover, not just cherry picking
Sorry, when are
things.
you doing this?
Probably in April. I'm going to start soon as so my book that I'm writing is on the history of money in Bitcoin. We'll talk about that if you want. And so as soon as that's through the editorial process, I'm then building curriculum based on that book to teach the story of money and to teach kids the things that I wish I would have known. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to start doing these book clubs. And the first one is to do Aristotle versus Marcus Aurelius, and which is a better template for living.
Nice. Yeah, I think I studied Marcus Aurelius years ago because I studied Italian when I went to university. I grew up
Yeah,
in Italy, but it was to sort of maintain the language. And then I went back to Italy for a year, and that year they were kind of doing this pilot program where you would go to university while you were there in your gap year. Um,
nice.
and you could basically pick what you wanted to study. So I was like, oh, well, this is kind of nice because I was doing an Italian/business degree, and I was like, oh, I can just pick whatever. So funnily enough, actually, I studied history of the United States. That was one of the
Nice.
units, and it's weird, like what you retain, because the only thing I retained about that was they were talking about the different immigrant communities came in and their approaches and the economic impact that it had.
Oh,
The
that's
Jewish
fascinating.
it was really interesting, but that's the only bit I remember of that whole unit. But basically, like the Jewish communities came in and they spent all of their money on education. So they basically like really focused on giving their kids education. So they went from being, very humble beginnings to having highly educated children who were doctors and
Mm-hmm.
lawyers and everything else. Irish community came in and they were all home builders. So they focused on building houses and that was their thing. And that was kind of in the immediate put them in a better situation economically. But then obviously the next generation, they were just home builders. They weren't in high paying
Right.
professions. And I just thought that that was really fascinating how like all of those cultural influences of what you place importance on kind of echo throughout the generations then as to like how they kind of get on in life. But the other thing I studied was the Stoics, so we did a whole bunch of the Stoics. I think Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
because I
And
remember
so,
reading his
yeah.
stuff. And Seneca, that was the other one that I did.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love Seneca. He's very
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an examination basically of Aristotelian, what he would have taught at his academy, and his ideas versus this idea of the Stoics. So in an essence, it's Aristotle versus Plato, which is always a fun game my husband and I like to play, because everything can be boiled down to whether it's Aristotelian or Platonic.
Really?
Absolutely.
What's the game?
Everything. So basically, like if someone says something, we're like, oh, it's Aristotelian, it's Platonic, or something from history. Like a great one, um, Catholic Spain with the Inquisition versus the English Enlightenment.
So
Or
which is
I'm sorry, the English Renaissance. So in England, you have Queen Elizabeth, who is doing these things, actionable steps, trying to look around and figure out, like, you have the, the Armada and all of that, or not the Armada, but you have her building England, you have Shakespeare, you have all of these wonderful things coming out of England. And then in Spain, you have the Inquisition, and they're contemporaneous. So you have Aristotle in England and Plato in Spain.
And so, sorry, just can you clarify what you mean? Why is Elizabeth Aristotelian?
Because Aristotle is all about observing and looking, and the Nicomachean Ethics is what it takes to live a happy life.
And then
And
Plato is all about
Plato is all about the forms, and we can't really ever see reality. And this ideal state, if you read the Republic, there's a section of it which is really interesting, and it actually sounds like communism took it straight from Plato's Republic, where he wants to have the society where the land is divvied out evenly, and if you leave, you can't take any amount of money over this amount out. If you come back in and you have more money, you have to, like, not bring it in, and it's sort of almost egalitarian utopia in some people's worlds, a
dystopia.
utopian, dystopian, but utopian society. He also doesn't advocate for anything in the arts because he sees it as a distraction from trying to be able to live in this other reality that he calls the forms, which, if you look at the Christian worldview, could be heaven. If you look at other worldviews, it can be like samsara. And so it's this ideal place. And he argues that Socrates was the only one ever who could see the forms. So it's our bodies, temptation, all of these things get in the way of actually letting us live. And Aristotle says those are the things that are worth living for. Not that you're going to be a hedonism. He speaks against hedonistic activities, Aristotle does. But he says to live in this space and to open your eyes and observe. That is how you can be a happy life. Finding something that you can enjoy and earning money from. That's what makes a happy life. And so the Stoics are much more aligned with some Platonic ideals where certain things get in the way of living. And so they advocate for you to stay on this sort of path, and not
Kind
go
of be
too
in the
far
world, but
away.
not of it.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so it gets really fascinating to study all these early, and Epicureanism is another one that comes around the same, a little later, but around the same time about than the Stoics. So originally you have Plato, and it was Socrates, and then Plato and Aristotle. And then you start getting Neoplatonism, and then these other little ideas, Stoicism, Epicureanism, Neoplatonism, all these things start happening as well, particularly in the Roman period, and they just kind of flourish and take off like wildfire. And then after that, you have these ideas, and Aristotle's Academy and his ideas continue. And then you get Christianity, that it all just kind of goes away.
And so, do you see Christianity as a negative force that comes in on that kind of
No,
enlightenment?
I
No.
don't I don't think it's negative per se, but I think it's interesting because all of these things, and if you look at Epicureanism and you look at Stoicism, you can see their impact on these Christians, because Christianity changes. And I know I'm not going to be popular, but I'm a historian, right? So I studied all the documents, but Christianity changes from its earliest inceptions, and you read Eusebius and you read about the first 7 ecumenical councils, and you start seeing that there was this stuff. And if you look at the actual writings of the apostles, and then you start looking at the way that centralized authorities deal with it, it changes. I mean, the first church to split from the main, what we would now call the Catholic Church, but back then it was just the church, are the Egyptians. The Coptic Church splits way before the Byzantines. And there are things that they're saying that, well, that's not right. One, it is the embodiment of Christ. Is he man? Is he spirit? Is he son? Is he actually son? What is he? The other one is when you celebrate Easter. and they split really early. So the Coptic Church, which is what I really focused on, particularly in the burial practices in my research, is um it splits. And then later you have the Byzantine split, kind of for the same reasons. Although it's a little more complex because you have the geopolitical stuff that's going on with Rome also. And so religion is I'm fascinated by it. And so these philosophies and these early philosophies, they infiltrate through the empire into these religions. You even have some of what we would call these mystery cults, that like Serapis and things like that, that they all have a little influence on Christianity, whether it's how it's practiced or what some of the later gospels or books are, or practices, or how the church deals with things. These all
So
come
are
into
you
play.
saying that like the Christianity that we kind of know today is a very different form to what it would have been in its inception? And how is it
Absolutely.
different? Is it softer? Is it like how would you describe it different? Like if you were practicing Christianity as it was intended
Yeah.
2000 years ago, what would you be doing differently than a modern day Christian?
Um, well, it depends on the sect, I should say. There are those that follow the King James version of the Bible. And if you're reading any sort of modern interpretation or King James, then you're already seeing it through a lens that's already far removed. So it's already been filtered. Um, some of the rituals, they're not in the Bible. Things that we associate with Christianity that came from rituals that came into the church, and they could have been
You're talking about
created.
like the bread and the wine and stuff.
That some of that's in there, but yeah, those kinds of rituals. But even outside of, say, the Catholic Church, even some other religions or some other sects of Christianity. I mean, you have Martin Luther, right? And that's going to change everything. You Catholics during the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, it's extraordinarily corrupt. I mean, you have the indulgences.
Mm.
So it's so all of this history weaves through, and now we're in the 21st century, and the religion we have now is going to be very different. Originally, Christianity spread because it was open to anybody, and the Roman religions were open to men. These were
Oh.
cults. So that's why Constantine's mother influenced her, or influenced him, because it was women, children, slaves, people that were outside of these Roman religions where they could practice, but it was exclusive, the traditional Roman religion, and Christianity was inclusive. And so that's how it spread, because women teach their children.
Mm.
Even in ancient Athens, which was not friendly to women, up to the age 4 or 5, women did all of the rearing of their children, even the boys. Heavy, heavy influence. Those are those formative years.
The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
It's true. It's true. And so that's how Christianity spread so much. You didn't have monasteries at first. I mean, that's Pacoimus in Egypt in the 3rd century. They were originally,
Wow.
the original monks were these desert ascetics like St. Anthony, who went out to the desert. They renounced all of their worldly goods, and they fought the demons, which would have been the human body, fighting off hunger, starving themselves, not being near any other person. You talk about your dog being a pack animal. Us humans, we're primates, right? We are social creatures.
Mm.
And so um renouncing any sort of need for other human contact, not even in a physical way like you would with a partner, but just any sort of contact. So they would go out, these desert ascetics, and they would renounce everything of this world. Well, that sure sounds like Plato to me. And so
Mm.
you can see these influences in Christianity. And if you, the New Revised Standard Bible, if anybody's curious, is one of the best sources because it's closest to the
The what?
original
Sorry,
text.
say it again.
It's called a New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. It has the Septuagint in it, so it has the Old Testament and the New Testament. But if you start reading the New Testament, you can start seeing this influence of these other Epicureanism. You're like, oh, that sounds like Epicureanism. That's fascinating.
So you think the
And
people that wrote those things were essentially influenced by the ideas of the time, right?
absolutely. We
Huh.
are a product of our, so I'm influenced every day by something. I'm now living in El Salvador. I mean,
Mm.
everything we take in,
Are
like
you
the
now
human mind is
Catholic?
a sponge. No, I'm not. My husband was raised Catholic, and his whole family's Catholic, but he's not anymore either.
Right.
Um, and I'm very grounded. Um, I'm very much in tune with my belief system. I am very grounded. But if you look at my Twitter profile, it says Aristotle fangirl on there. I am very much Aristotelian in my belief system. I think we need to go out into the world and we need to observe. I'm very anti-video game because I'm seeing what it does to children's minds.
Hmm.
And I tell parents, do not let your kids play video games. I can give people research studies, all this stuff. And I have so many anecdotal stories of how it's destroying curiosity and destroying minds.
Mm.
Because all you're doing is looking at this alternative reality. It's platonic. And I think they should be out in the lagoon observing what's right in front of them. And that's what Aristotle did. He went out to the world and
So
he was observing. And I think that's a much beautiful
I'm
way.
I'm curious, like I have a question there, but like how do you see, for example, things like hallucinogenic experiences tying into that then? Because you could argue, some would argue that that's observing a deeper reality, or others would argue that that's a fake reality. And I remember reading this book by, do you know Brian Moriesco?
I don't.
Um, oh, it's a really interesting book. It's called, oh, wait, what's the name of the book? I've turned my phone off. Hang on. What's it called? Uh Oh, come back to me. I'll send it to you. But he basically wrote this book. He went and
You want me to look it
analyzed
up?
the old chalices that people would use for
Okay.
for the, what do you call it again? Is it the sacrament where you have the wine and the bread? Is it a sacrament? Is that what it's called? What's it called in church where they bring around the wine and the bread? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so and he went and analyzed those, but they found that they actually had like drugs in them, like hallucinogenic drugs. And his theory is that, when people were having these sort of, experiences with God and everything else, that they were actually kind of on LSD or psilocybin or whatever it might be, like some kind of hallucinogenic substance. It's really fascinating how he tracks that through the religious practice. So he says, a lot of the religious practices that we have now actually come from that. The Elysium, I think he was talking about Elysium in Greece, where they would do that. So
And
how
that's
is that more platonic then? Would you
That would be
say?
more platonic. It would be the
Hmm.
same as, I'm an anthropologist, so I've studied indigenous cultures around the world, which I draw a lot in the early part of my book about these cultures and how they dealt with economics and money. And so like you have the sweat lodges of the Native Americans, mushrooms in various continents. I taught Native American history, so I know a lot about their particular practices. There are frogs that you could lick
Yeah,
the
the
backs of.
DMT frogs, I've heard of
Yeah,
that. Poor
um,
frogs.
there's datura, which grows all over the place. I can see it on the side of the road all the time.
There's
And
what?
so
Datura. Never.
datura, it's a plant that actually is here in El Salvador also, and it's a very hallucinogenic plant. And no, I'm not going
Hmm.
to point it out to anybody if I'm out and I see it. So I see that as very platonic because I think we should be very much one with our mind at all times. And I feel, that's just how I live my life. I mean, I have friends that partake of things and I don't judge them. And like we all have our own life. It's just not for me. I want to be the most I do is I have an occasional drink, and on a very rare occasion I have too many occasional drinks. But I've never done drugs. I've never really, well, I can't say never, but the most I've ever done was marijuana when I was much younger, and it's just not my thing. And so but that's okay. I know it works for a lot of people, and but I want to be present of mind. I want to see what's going on. I want to feel, I want to experience everything around me. And I don't want to numb that or to not be part of that. And I
Mm,
know that people want those experiences for a higher calling. That's okay, but that's not my purpose. That's not what I see as my role in my life.
mm,
I want to be present. I want to be able to observe everything. But so when I say I'm Aristotelian, I'm like, there's no gray area for me. I'm all one way. And I don't know if that's always the best way to live. I can be platonic. But I'm purposeful if I put what I call putting my head in the sand where I just don't want to deal with something. But I know
yeah.
what I'm doing. We can't handle everything all the time.
Yeah, and I mean that's fair enough, right? Each to their own, and you've obviously
Yeah.
picked which philosophy works for you. Tell me about how you ended up in El Salvador then, because you're running the education company, you're sort of going through your
Hmm.
Bitcoin journey at the same time. You said it's the first time you've ever lived abroad. So, what was the decision tree that made you move there?
Bitcoin.
That's it.
Bitcoin and Bukele, honestly.
Huh.
I saw a lot more opportunities here. And because I didn't have an audience for what I was doing in America, I figured, well, I could come down here. And I initially wanted to open up a school, but logistically, it's very, very difficult to do it. Not the red tape we have in the West, like in America. It wasn't a matter of regulations. It's just a matter of finding a space. We don't have a car, so we're reliant upon Ubers or drivers. And I know it sounds very colonial of me, but we'll get a car at some point. I'm a little still nervous to drive here. I didn't drive when I was in Egypt. I'm just, I don't know. I'm very
Oh, I wouldn't
cautious.
drive in Egypt. I used to have a boss who was from Egypt, and when he told me about how they drove over there, I was like, "What?"
No, no
He
way.
always used to say to me, "You Western people, you're so soft."
I know. And it's better here. It's much better here than Egypt, but I still don't want to drive, particularly in the city. And we're doing fine. It's great. We live in the beach areas and it's nice and we can get what we need to most days, so it's fine. Um, and so I came down here, opened a school, and it just isn't. And so we moved late last July. And the first few months I was flailing, trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do. I was going to start teaching local expat children because, again, I don't speak Spanish fluently. Roughly, barely is more accurate in my Spanish. I'm trying, I'm working on it. It just, old dog, new tricks. So I kind of was going to start teaching expat kids, but the reality of it is that there's a lot of expats here that are in the same position I was, trying to figure things out, what they were going to do for a job and a career. So they didn't necessarily have money to pay me so I can earn a living
Mm.
at teaching. So I kept on at the writing center that I work with, and I was going to volunteer, and then that sort of happened with the curriculum. And so I decided, well, I'm going to take all this because it's really cool information. It answers the why we need Bitcoin, which I think without the why, it's just a fancy new toy. And
Mhm.
again, maybe that's not a popular opinion, and people will eventually figure it out. But I think if you start to orange pill people with the why this is important, it's a more compelling argument.
Yeah.
So I fill in the why with this book. And then so that's what I've been working on for the past 5 months or so, pretty much,
Hmm.
is putting this book together. It should be released May 14th is a tentative date. It's at the editor now, and that's the first round, and then we'll go back and forth a little bit.
And can you talk about the book then? It's called From
Yeah.
Shells to Satoshi, right?
Yeah. Shells to Satoshi, the story of money and rise of Bitcoin. And it starts with the basically my disclaimer that this is through an Austrian economic lens. So I'm not Keynesian. Obviously, if I'm a Bitcoiner, I think that should be obvious, but I just like to state it. And
You mean you
so,
don't think that printing vast amount of money will make everybody rich? How
well,
is
it
that
depends on
possible?
it
Can you
depends
give me
on
your
who.
academic justification?
Yes, depends on who's doing the printing, right? Who's getting rich. Um, so it starts with trade and barter, and I bring in indigenous societies to show how there's simple barter, and then it gets more complex, and then you get to Mesopotamia where they start using these little shekels or ingots of metal. They're not stamped, they're not coins, they're just little like melted down bullion. And then from that we get the Lydians with coinage, and then from there we get the Athenians, and then we get Mesopotamian has very rudimentary banking, but then by the time we get to Rome, banking and economics get a little more complex. We get Chinese paper money. And so it's kind of a historical anthropological examination of how humans have invented and reinvented money over time. And then I sort of take a pause in that story after the Renaissance and the development of the Reichsbank, the first central bank, and talk about what up to this point, like the characteristics of money, different lenses, basically Austrian versus Keynesian economics, how we would view economics, and then we do the deep dive into modern economics, starting 19th century, but really focusing on the 20th century for a couple of chapters, going into central banking, World War I and II policies, the Bretton Woods system, and then the 1971 implosion with Nixon and the gold standard, and how all of these American things, by the time you get to the 20th century, America is so key in economic and global affairs because of these things that are implemented. If something happens in America, it impacts the rest of the world, whether people want to admit it or not. And as an American, it's actually, I find it quite embarrassing that, but it was Britain before that, right? And before
Mm.
that, you could argue it was Portugal or one of the, in the
Well, this is
Arab
it, isn't it?
trade.
Empires kind of rise and fall. I mean, I remember reading up, I gave a presentation. Actually, was it? No, actually, when I first started on sort of my Bitcoin journey with Access Tribe, I did like a pilot course of like 6 sessions teaching people. And it's actually, there's nothing like teaching to make you learn something, because I had to research each episode and, each lesson and really like kind of delve into stuff. But I remember reading up about the UK banking system and how we basically exported our inflation to the colonies. So we
Yeah.
forced them to bank with our sort of central bank, and basically were able to export inflation to them. Just terrible, really. It's terrible what humans do to each other. It's just this constant
Awful.
desire to dominate in a, I think, a psychopathic segment of society that just can't
Mm-hmm.
mind their own business and row their own boat, and they're just desperate to control what everyone else is doing and how they're doing it and when they're doing it. But it is quite shocking, actually, when you see just how the underlying monetary system just causes all these societal problems. I mean, I know we say this all the time in Bitcoin, like Bitcoin fixes this, and it sounds like a cliche, but it's kind of true. I mean, there's almost
Yes.
nothing that you can throw Bitcoin at that it doesn't fix, you know?
It's true. It's true. And so that's what I unpack. So the first half of the book is just how humans invented and reinvented money, and it's okay. And then we get to the first central bank, and then it implodes. And so this is the why. So explaining, fractional reserve banking and all of these different things that happened over time and these policies, that explains why we need Bitcoin. And then I have a couple chapters on Bitcoin, the history of Bitcoin, the genesis really of how Bitcoin came about, why it came about, the philosophical underpinnings. And then I have one chapter just on how to navigate it, very rudimentary. Like, this is the mempool, these are wallets, and just kind of explaining things, because there's other places that are better equipped to give people that technical information. I mean,
Mm.
there are apps, there are books, there are, other things, right? So that applied information they can get elsewhere. I'm theory, like I'm all sort of out, trying to give these big picture as to the why. That's the question I'm answering throughout. And then it ends with kind of this chapter about what we can do in our own lives in adopting Bitcoin and how there's hope for the future.
Mm. It's a nice
And
way to wrap it up. Yeah.
And then I have appendices of primary sources of law codes talking about money dating all the way back to Mesopotamia, Roman law codes, Aristotle's idea on money, the Bretton Woods system, some elements from that, Nixon's address from 1971, because I'm a historian. And if you want to understand something, go to the source. And so I'm trying to encourage people to go to the source. So I have a lot of appendices of all of these primary source documents, and I thought it would be convenient just to put them there. So people who get
Wow.
the book, when they're reading and say, see Appendix A, if they're curious, they can go read the Law Code of Hammurabi and see how money was dealt with.
Do you know, it's so funny? I was in Austin last week for the Pleb Lab Top Builder Finals thing, and I had a conversation over dinner with a really interesting guy who I won't dox, but we had a really long conversation about money and stuff, and he's like just obsessive about studying these things. And he actually made an interesting point, which I was going to bring up when you were talking about the evolution of money, because he said, um, I'm probably going to butcher this now, but he basically was sort of saying that the problem is not that the supply of money is flexible, because if the money itself, he said, tying a money to, so his premise was that the gold standard wasn't optimal because you're basically tying something to a commodity and not to labor. And so what he was saying was that, the expanding money supply is not a problem if, $1, let's say, equals 1 hour of labor. So if the quantity of labor expands because there are more people or whatever, then the expansion of the money is not a problem. The issue is that whoever's administering that has the temptation then to increase the money supply, which is basically why Bitcoin fixes it by preventing that from
Right.
happening. Would you agree with that in a historical context?
I absolutely do. Because I say this over and over throughout the book, the only value we have as humans is our time and energy that we spend ideas we can put into that category. So if we are putting our time and energy in something in exchange for something of value, whether it's using a barter system like, hey, I can teach your kids, can you color my hair? I've done that. So, so you can change value. So this is my time and energy that I can offer you and you can give me. So, but we have this thing, this intermediary thing, because of we don't always need or want the same things that people have to offer. So we needed something in this intermediary role
Nor
that
at the
could,
same time, right?
right, yeah, so that we could have and say, okay, give me that, and then later or with someone else, I can exchange, right? So that's the reason why we have money. And I talk about that there's this, the double coincidence of wants is what it's called. And so with our time and energy, that's all we have. It's humans. That's our value. Governments don't have that to offer. They have to exploit their citizens to get it through taxation or whatever, right? And so governments don't produce anything. They're not producers. Humans, individuals are producers. Collectively in a business, they're all producers, all working for the same goal, but individually they're the ones producing. And so, and we get paid in money, whatever that looks like. So I am in absolute agreement with that, that Bitcoin is finite with what we have. But we can go down and those values of those individual units, Satoshis, can go up, right? So that's how it's being adjusted.
Mm.
So if we were on a Bitcoin standard, we wouldn't increase the amount of Bitcoin. We would increase a little bit of maybe the value if there are more hours or something like that, right? But as humans, we should be able to take what we get for that time and energy we expel and count on it because
Yeah,
we've
it
already
shouldn't lose its value. Mm.
yeah, we've already expended that energy. And so with Bitcoin, it will keep going up on that premise, right? Um, for different reasons. I mean, you have Bitcoin that are lost. You have people that are, well, that are just acquiring. And so it seems like there are fewer Bitcoin becoming available and people are freaking out about it. I see it on Twitter. But if you think about it and you start understanding the why and how money works, which is what I try to do in my book and what I want to use to build out the curriculum to teach kids. Well, high school kids will have more complex and it'll get more simple all the way down. But this idea of we have to have something that works for us to make it worth us having time and energy to expend. And we look at the modern world, and again, I'm American, so I'm going to use America. I like to unfortunately bash on my country these days.
It's okay.
But
We all do the same thing, not just to America, to our own countries.
okay. So, but I mean, I lived in Seattle and I lived there during, through COVID, and there's so many able-bodied individuals that are just out there like strung out on meth or whatever, and they're in the streets shooting up. And I start to wonder, I'm like, okay, education system, um, ease of drugs, safe injection sites, so it's normalized. And this is why, when you ask me about people doing, like mushrooms and things like that, I'm actually I guess I am getting a little more judgmental because I see what's happening in the world where people are just checking out of reality and not even wanting to be responsible human beings anymore, being productive citizens. Because as humans, being productive, that's what we get. That's what we are. We're not ants. We're not like leafcutter ants. But we should find something that we find interesting that we can exchange to support ourselves in our lives. That's the goal. Yeah, my
Mm,
dad worked a job he hated, and I hated to see it. My mom, the same thing. Yeah, my
mm.
dad worked a job he hated, and I hated to see it. My mom, the same thing. I'm not built that way. Goes back to I'm Aristotle, right? I want to be happy. So I seek out things to do to exchange value so I can support myself. And that's how life should be. So when I see people checking out, there's more of a prevalence. And I think a lot of it is because of the broken money. There's no longer any stability. So education
Mm.
is failing them. They're no longer curious. They don't have anything driving them in terms of intellectual. And then you have a broken money system where why bother because it's not going to be worth anything anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, as well? The education system is at an interesting inflection point, which I find really fascinating, where it's education can't keep up with the pace of change right now anyway. I mean, even if you go and do a degree in, I don't know, computer science, it'll be out of date by the time you leave. You talk to people who are deeply technical. I mean, last week it was all like builders in the Bitcoin space, and these people are all highly technical, and all of them were saying that they just can't keep up with the pace of change in the Bitcoin ecosystem with what's happening in Lightning and Nostr and everything else.
Yeah.
It's just changing too quickly. And especially now with AI, you've got this kind of, driving force of kind of acceleration. Um, and I wonder actually what that's going to do to the education system, because the universities are failing because of ideology. And I think everybody broadly accepts that. I mean, when we saw the
Right.
hearings that happened with the Harvard and oh my, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I just could not believe it. And I think the whole situation with Gaza and Israel is complex, but I don't think it's complex that when you have students on a campus calling for the genocide of other students, that you don't have to wait until the action turns into actually action.
I
To
know.
the words turn into action. I think that's what they said. If they act on it, then it's then we would
Which is
chastise. They were like,
actually
sorry, you want your students to genocide other students, and then you'll call them into the office and tell them that they might have to leave. I mean, it's just
but if
insane.
it but if it went the other way, they would be expelled.
Well,
So
I
it's
think
very
that was
biased,
the point, right? They were saying, I was
right?
listening to a
Yeah.
podcast this morning, and there was a professor from NYU saying that the sheer hypocrisy of it, because just before you could say one thing that somebody like professors would say something that offended a student and they'd lose their job immediately.
Yeah.
Um, so I
It's
mean,
true. And I walked away before that was going to happen to me. I taught a class on ancient Greece and Rome, and I had a student complaining that I wasn't teaching anything from African Americans. Why didn't I have any African American literature in there? I'm not
what
kidding.
in the ancient Greece and Rome? Well, I mean, maybe there were Africans there, but they wouldn't have been African
And
Americans.
I brought that in. I'm like, well, when we get to Rome, we're going to be looking at some African poets because they were slaves and they were released and they wrote this wonderful poetry, and their person that they were working for or enslaved from freed them because they saw the value. But no, that wasn't, yeah. So it was only a matter of time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Welcome. And that was in 20, that incident was like 2015 or 2016. So what people are seeing now, it's been going on for a long time. And I think
Wow.
that's what is most shocking when I start talking with people about the system and how long and how bad it's been broken, because it's only in the news now. But this has been going on
Mm.
for a long time.
I mean, Jordan Peterson was raising the alarm about this years ago as well, and
Oh
everybody
yeah.
thought that even his friends were all like, "Oh, come on, you're really overdoing this. It's surely it can't be that bad." And now here we are, where it's become socially acceptable to call for the genocide of your fellow student, and the professors will just be like, "Oh, sorry,
I
free
know.
speech."
And then you have a Supreme Court justice, like what, this week or last week,
I
saying that the
died
First
when I read
Amendment,
that.
I just can't. I mean, hello, why do you think I'm in El Salvador?
I mean, I was just thinking this is crazy. Does she understand what her job is? It's to
I
like
don't.
protect and uphold the Constitution. Like, does she have any? I mean, when she took her oath and sat, I was like, did you miss that bit of the thing? I
I'd be
mean,
surprised if she read the Constitution at this point.
oh God, I mean, I hope not. That would be something else. I mean, that was just astounding. It was literally astounding that she. The thing I find crazy is these people just don't even seem to have any self awareness. Like
No.
you're sat there on, I don't know, whatever it is, national television or whatever in a public setting, basically saying you don't understand your job, and you've got like one of the most important jobs in the land. It's people aspire their whole careers to be a Supreme Court justice, and you've basically just come out and said, I have no idea why I'm here and I don't understand the Constitution, nor
Yeah,
how I'm supposed to protect and defend it. I mean, just
it's
embarrassing.
it is. And yeah. I might
Yeah.
start picking up some other accent so people don't know I'm American. I got to figure something out. I better get fluent in Salvadoran Spanish real quick and dye my hair or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, sorry, we've run over a little bit, but if you've got time, actually, I'm just curious to hear about what your experience has been like being in El Salvador. Can you talk a little bit just from a practical standpoint, what it's been like adjusting to the
Absolutely.
culture and the day to day?
It's amazing. The people here
Really?
are so kind and generous and lovely. I've had no negative encounters with another human being that's Salvadoran down here, to be honest.
Wow.
Um, it's hot. I'm gonna just say. I mean, we lived in Florida, northern Florida, but we lived in Florida. I've lived in Arizona. I dug in Egypt, and I know I'm older, but it's hot. I live at the beach and it's hot. So there's that. So just know that you're going to be living in shorts and tank tops. And as a female, you won't wear makeup unless you're on a podcast because it's just going to melt off. Um, so if you can get through all of that, like this week was tough because we had one day where there was a planned power outage in the I live like in a community. The community, there was a water main break, so we didn't have water during the day for 2 days. It's a third world country. And I think
Mm,
my time in Egypt helped prep me for that. I'm also, I'm happy to be here, so I probably have a different attitude. I see
mm.
beauty throughout everywhere I go, even looking at some of the places where people look to be living like super impoverished. But you know what? These Salvadorians have gumption and spirit like I haven't seen in a long time since I was in Egypt.
Well,
They're
they've been through a
resourceful.
lot, right?
Yeah, they're selling coconuts on the side of the road. They want to be productive citizens here. And it is such a breath of fresh air after
Mm.
being in modern America that it
Yeah.
is so inspiring to see that the people of El Salvador value their lives and themselves enough to hustle, do whatever it takes. Like we sit down at the beach and we get like people are out there selling. They're selling hats, they're selling bags. There's guys with their horses that are offering horseback rides.
Mm.
And this is a big, I mean, there are expats here, but I live in a Salvadoran place. Like there's a lot of Salvadorans here, and the Salvadorans are renting the horses from the Salvadorans. And it's just part of the culture, and it's wonderful. The food is amazing. The one thing I do have to say is I love spicy food, and Salvadorian food is not spicy. It's not
Oh,
Mexican.
really? Oh, so that
Yeah,
would suit
it's
me.
very,
I mean, I like the taste of spicy food, but I can't really
yeah.
tolerate it, like red
Yeah,
hair
so
and all that.
I buy my imported hot sauce and I carry it in my purse so I can have my spicy food. Um, but
Oh.
yeah, it's wonderful. I have no regrets. I love what Bukele's doing. There's now this week they just came out with a constitutional amendment against any sort of medical tyranny. So basically there's a separation between medicine and state here now. So if the
Hmm.
World Health Organization says, El Salvador, you have to do this to your citizens, and they're gonna be like, yeah, no, sorry, we can't do that because we have separation.
Oh, that's very
That's
good to know. We had something
amazing.
similar. I mean, I live in Alberta and we had something similar with that, where they basically were they've brought out some kind of a change to the provincial law to say that you can't force people to take vaccinations and that kind of stuff. Well, particularly with this World Health Organization trying to push
Mhm.
this treaty that's, essentially going to force countries to do whatever they say if they decide to arbitrarily declare some kind of an emergency, be it for whatever reason. I mean, it's bonkers, really. It was funny actually because I was chatting to somebody about this yesterday, and we were talking about all of this stuff about Kate Middleton from the royal family being all
Oh,
over the news.
geez.
Yeah, and I was sort of saying to them, I said, look, here's my take on it. I don't know if she's had a serious operation that went wrong and she's genuinely in hospital. There were rumors that she's in an induced coma, whatever.
Yeah.
If she is, I'm really sorry about that. I hope she gets better soon. I've got no idea. But what does seem very odd to me is that they have intentionally, like the palace has intentionally put stuff out that is obviously fake, like the photo, the doctored photo, the weird tweet that apparently came from her the next day that clearly it just wasn't on brand for like what the royal
Right.
family would
Yeah.
do. And they're so obviously and egregiously fake, these things, that to me it's almost done with the intent of making people think that something is going on. And I was talking to somebody in the UK about this, and they were saying to me that the news cycle is just filled with it. Like that's all you see when you turn on the TV. Where's Kate? What's going on? What's happening? And I said to them, well, that's interesting, because my question then would be is like, what are they trying to distract you from, with all of this kind of weird nonsense? that's very
Right.
off brand for the family. It feels very strange, like they would never normally behave like this. And they're obviously purposely trying to stoke these kind of conspiracy theories. So my question is like, why? Like, what are they trying to hide? And I was thinking about it and I thought, well, the only major thing I can think of coming down the line that they don't want people paying attention to before they get it over the line is the pandemic treaty. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know what else would need this level of distraction that the
It's
UK
yeah,
population is busy worrying about what's happening to the future king's mother and not about to their own freedoms and safety, you know?
it's true. And I mean, it was kind of chicken and the egg, but it seems like they're taking a page out of the American playbook because the media in America has mastered it, right? There's a direct line of communication between social media and the White House.
Yeah.
So, like, hey, look, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And then they're gonna, pass a bill at midnight. No one's gonna know about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the media in general has just become farcical. I don't know.
Okay.
I still love, like, I mean, there's still people here that like watch that, like read the sort of government sponsored newspapers and think that they're not reading propaganda. And I'm just like, like, what actually has to happen for you to realize that you need to
I have
diversify your news sources?
I have friends and family in the States that still watch either CNN or MSNBC or Fox. Pick your poison, they're all poison. And they're like, "Oh, but what he's done to those prisoners." I'm like, "Yeah, and you know what? How many freed people who were prisoners in their own house during the
Are
with
you talking
because of
about
the
Bukele
gangs?"
here?
Yeah.
Mm,
And they're like, "Oh, but it's not safe there." And I'm like, I don't know. I walk around all the time. I've walked around San Salvador. I've walked around different areas. I've had no problem. Yeah, I feel really safe here, better than I did in Seattle. And I don't hear gunshots like I did in the rural part of North Florida I lived in.
wow.
I lived in a small city in North Florida and we could hear gunshots and they weren't from the military bases.
And they weren't
So,
hunting.
mm-mm.
Oh, wow.
It was in the town and so or the city. So I feel much safer here.
Mm.
Safer than I felt in a long time, even living in Pasadena in California. Like there are certain parts that I would have to drive through, and you just hope that you're not going to be hit by a stray bullet.
Wow.
And so I'm like, yeah, I don't. People are just insane. That's what I'm going to
Well,
leave with.
I think they don't know. I mean, it was interesting actually because I was interviewing what's her name, Lorraine Marcel from Bitcoin Data. So she's based
Mhm.
in Kenya, and she was talking to me about some of the perceptions that Westerners have about Africa and things like that. We were talking about just like what their expectation is when they come. And I just said to her, I think you guys probably don't appreciate in Africa how indoctrinated we are in the West about Africans are all poor. They all live in mud huts. They're backwards. They're all violent. They all need your help. They're all starving. That, like the list goes on and on and on. I mean, we don't
Mhm.
get taught that Africa's this beautiful country full of beautiful resources and rich in culture. We get taught that these people are like, they need our help because they're backward and they're not as good. I
Oh,
mean, it's just
yeah.
like drilled into you from, I mean, I can remember from a really young age, just even on the TV, all these pictures of starving babies. And
It's
that was my
manipulation. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
so you grow up with this notion that like everybody in Africa needs your help.
I know. But that's actually, and this is gonna just go down. We could talk about this for 2 hours, but that's Marxism, right? And it's cultural
Mm,
Marxism that's everywhere. You have victims and oppressors, and that's it.
mm.
You have to be in one category or another. And right now, if you're white, you're the oppressor by autumn, just because the melanin in your skin happens to be where it is.
But I mean, how condescending as well to Africans. That's the thing that just really pisses
Absolutely.
me off about it.
And it's absolutely racist, right? It's
Mm,
absolutely racist.
yeah,
And that's what I'm saying. Like this whole thing, and it goes back generations.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's that
it's
whole
going
kind of like
on.
thing of like, well, this I could get on a rant about this, but like the sort of champagne socialist notion, like we have a segment of society in the UK that are usually very affluent, and they're very, very left wing, and there's no problem with that inherently. I'm like, everybody has their own political leanings, but it's very much about like I'm sort of, wealthy and I need to help people because these poor people, they need my help. And it's like, no, they don't. Like, stop condescending to them. Like, they don't need your
It's
help. Like, you're not better than them or somehow that you should come and teach them or, instruct them on how things should be done. And it's always this thing that's very much a distinction based on socioeconomic status and educational status is the other thing. Oh, yeah, you're dumb because you don't have an education. You're not like, really? Go fish, go
Yeah.
hunt, go do something
Right.
practical with
Go
your.
try to
I know you have a
figure out.
PhD, but you won't be offended by this. But take your PhD and go and feed yourself. How about
It's true though, but I'm probably more humbled than most about that. I only got it because I wanted to fix the system from within, and I figured if I had the letters that I would have the street cred. And then 6 months later, I walked away because I'm like,
I
this
mean,
is
look, I think
bad.
having a like deep and extensive education is a wonderful thing, but I don't think it should be lauded over somebody that's made a different choice or whatever. I think that's more my point. I mean, I think there's a huge
Yeah.
value in educating yourself.
I
Um,
do, but I don't think you need to go to college. You don't need the letters. You don't need the alphabet soup. I did it because I didn't know any better because but I mean, I actually had a good education. My master's degrees were very good. And part of that
how
is
many master's degrees do you have?
I have history and anthropology, just two. But I had
Okay,
a good education and
just two.
so, but I was curious. I read a lot, and I think that I mean, I'm very much a fan of the erudite, right? Where you are self-taught, self-made. And
Yeah,
even though I have these degrees, believe me, when I was getting my doctorate in education, the curriculum was so awful and so boring, and I could finish it in a day when it should have taken me 2 weeks. That I went down my own rabbit holes. I found
wow.
out all about the educational history in America and the world, and I did research on different systems.
Hmm.
And I was curious.
I
And
was
so
actually I saw
I'm
a clip of Michael's.
self-educated.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw a clip of Michael Saylor the other day, and he was recommending this series of volumes that he'd read of history, which I'm sure you know these people, but it's the story of. I made a note of it because I was like, download the audio, and I think it's about 50 hours for each book or something, but of 11 volumes. But it's the story of civilization, 11 volumes by Will
Oh
Durant
yeah,
and
the
Ariel Durant.
Durants.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're in my storage unit.
Are
I
they?
have all the books. And I'm not a listener. I rather read. So I don't
Right.
really ironically listen to podcasts. I don't listen to audiobooks at all. In fact, my husband and I are going back and forth. It's like, you need to do an audiobook. And I'm like, oh, I want people to use just read because you retain information better and like all this stuff. Because I'm an educator. So
See, I
but I'm gonna
don't
have to
know.
do
I mean,
audio.
I do a lot of audio and a lot of podcasts because I
Yeah.
walk dogs a lot. So for
Yeah.
me, I actually retain really well. And do you know, I found one thing that's really interesting is I can often remember exactly where I was when I heard a certain thing. So it's almost like the visual of where I am when I'm walking somehow gets tied to the
Yeah.
memory of the data. And I just have
But
this.
you're actively listening. I think a lot of people passively listen where they'll have it on in the background. And so they're cooking or they're dealing with their kids or they're driving or something. And so there's a passive listening that I think is prevalent. And that's what I struggle with more.
Mm,
Um, so like my husband listens to podcasts all the time. And I'm like, remember that podcast you were listening? He's like, no, because he's a passive listener and it drives me crazy. I'm like, well, then just focus, go take some notes. And that's what I feel. I'm such a like dorky student that if I'm listening to something, I'm taking notes. So I don't passively listen.
I do
So
find
it's
that actually, if
not
I'm
as
sitting
enjoyable.
still listening to somebody to absorb, I have to write down what they're saying or take notes. I don't take it in very well if I just sit and listen. And I'm
Yeah.
not very good at sitting still either. So I find that that's probably why it's easier for me to like learn on the go. And I used to read a lot actually when I was younger, like actual physical books. But now I just sort of find I don't sit still for long enough to do that. So it's just practically speaking, I'm like, well, I can probably get about 2-3 hours worth of audio in every day. So that's quite a lot of study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
try to do the Ted Lasso thing. Every person is a different person and I shouldn't be so read, but I also deal with a lot of young students, third, fourth graders that would rather just be playing video games and stuff. So, and
mm,
they're not reading like they used to. And it's such an important skill. That's
oh
where you build
yeah.
your vocabulary. That's where you do all these things. So even hearing words, seeing them spelled out on the page, I think. And so that's probably why I'm sensitive is because I'm teaching kids.
Yeah,
And there
no,
is a
that's
place
fair.
for reading more than, I'm probably not as judgy as on adults, but it's the children. And I have students saying, "Can I just listen to the audio?" And I don't let them.
Oh really?
I don't
Wow.
know if they do or not. I said, if you're going to listen to the audio book, I want you to have the book open and I want you to look at the words and I want
Well,
you to stop when there's a word that you don't understand and look it up in the dictionary.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm old fashioned though. I'm probably
I could
born
I could ask
at
you
least
about a million
150
questions, I
years
think,
too
about
late.
history though. I've got so many questions that I'm storing up in my head, but I'm like, we're going to be on the phone for like 2 hours this way. Like, nothing about Bitcoin, but I'm like, oh, maybe I should ask her about that. I've got a question about this. But I think we should do this again, is my point. Um
Okay.
and I
That
am
would be
very
great.
much looking forward to your spaces. So please do include me in any promos of that. And I'm happy to promote it, but I'm also
Thank you.
definitely going to join
Okay.
because that would just be too much fun.
It'll
Um,
be a lot of fun.
oh yeah, sounds amazing. Sounds absolutely amazing. And when do you think you're going to start the spaces after the book is out?
Well, right now I'm in the editorial process and I have people wanting the curriculum, so I want to get the high school curriculum out. So as soon as I um get a bulk of the curriculum, plus I'm also building a web page. So the book club and all of that, it's going to be Classical Educator Bookshelf is the website. And I'm building that out right now. I do my own web design. I don't know why, I just do. Um, Control freak, perhaps. So I just want it the way I want it. And it's easier if I just do it than having like try to communicate. So I'm building out the website. So hopefully the website will be up by the end of next week. I'll let you know. And from that, there'll be announcements about the spaces, the books that we're reading. And then I've got to earn a living, even though I live in El Salvador down here. I'll probably have affiliate links if anybody wants to order a book or something like that on there too.
Okay, well,
Because
this is
I'm not
probably going
charging
to
for
go
this.
out. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
not.
going to say this probably go out on the 2nd of April. So if you've got the website
Oh
done by
yeah,
then,
I'll
let me
have it.
know.
I'll send it to you. Yeah. And it'll be after that, the first one on Aristotle and Aurelius. So, and it'll be in April.
Okay,
I just don't
amazing.
know when. Yeah.
Ah, so excited.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's free. You just, you can either listen to the audiobook or
Oh,
read,
you're doing the
or
book free, really?
I'm doing the book clubs for free.
Oh, the book clubs for free, right?
Yeah. And then no, my book will be out on Amazon Kindle. I'm talking with a publisher right now just to figure out about paper distribution. So I'm not sure exactly the format on that, but as far as like the book club and all my time that goes into that, I'm gonna just do affiliate links if anybody wants to use those to order the book. No big deal if they don't. Um, they're also free online. If you go to Project Gutenberg, most of what I'm gonna be teaching will be available there. So if you want to read it just digitally, you can get that
Mhm.
too. Or if you're like me
Okay.
and you want to highlight and you have your whole annotating system on with pencil in your books, then you would need a paper copy.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Deanna. This has
Well,
been
thank you.
wonderful. Yeah, I
Fun.
mean, gosh, you have such a rich mind and
Well, thank you.
so much to share. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to all of that. I can't wait. So keep me posted,
I will.
and I'll let you know when this is out and all the rest of that. But yeah, thank you again.
Thank you. It was fun.